Well, welcome to the Holy Shift Podcast. These are conversations about church leadership and culture. I'm Scott Neal, your host. On this episode, we have pastor, church planner, and author of the book Echoing Hope: How the Humanity of Jesus Redeems Our Pain. He is also host of the Theology Curator podcast. He and his wife, Lauren, have 2 daughters and recently moved from Seattle, Washington to Canada to pastor Brentview Baptist Church. I'm talking about Kurt Willems. Welcome to the Holy Shift Podcast, Kurt.
Hey. So happy to be here, Scott. And thanks for that kind introduction. Definitely fun to get to talk about Jesus and book and ministry or whatever comes up.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a real honor to have you here. I have actually followed you for quite some time. You and I got connected because of not only your podcast, but different things that you've posted. I can't remember if it was Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or something, but something you said a few times tweaked my interest, and I began to follow you a little bit. And you had a contest probably a year ago, I guess it was, maybe not that long ago, but you were giving away N.T. Wright books, and I'm an N.T. Wright fan. So I said, hey, well, let me apply. And I actually won. I think it's probably one of the only things I've actually won, but it was great. And you sent me not only a signed copy of your book, which I have here, and that's the book I've been reading, but you also sent me all of N.T. Wright's, or at least many of his books. So that was great. That was a great way to get to know you. So I wanted to put you on the podcast at the very beginning, but you were actually in the process of moving from Seattle to Canada, and you have begun to pastor Brentview Baptist Church. So, wow, why Canada? I just want to get started right there. What are you tired of the U.S. or what's the deal?
Oh, wow, it's such a good question. I love how you said it. So I think in the back of our minds, we always thought, oh yeah, we could imagine ourselves somewhere like Canada or even England. Different culture, but similar enough to step into ministry. And about 3 years ago, this would have been 2018, I believe, we began to just sense in our heart that God was guiding us towards something new. Didn't know what that meant. And we knew it wasn't going to be fast. And so we just said, God, we're open, we're available. What does that look like? And, that happens in 2018. 2019, still nothing. We're just like, maybe this, no, maybe this, no, a bunch of almost opportunities. And, so as we move towards the pandemic, I've written my book at that point, or I'm writing my book at that point. It's kind of like, oh, were we hearing right? Like, what's going on here? Because this is taking a lot longer than is convenient for our plan, God. So what's up?
Yeah.
And somewhere in that journey, someone contacted a mutual friend in Canada and said, hey, do you know anyone who is kind of in our similar stream of faith? Some people know me for having sort of an Anabaptist background and some of this kingdom theology stuff. And so people get to know people. And so some of those people are in Canada. And so I got an email one day saying, hey, there is a job opening up. It's probably not going to open up for a while, but would you be open to having a conversation with someone from this church? And the church was Brentview Baptist Church. And I thought to myself, okay, I've never been, well, maybe I was for a very short season as Baptist as a youth pastor, but it's not like a tradition I'd been a part of. And so I was like, okay, but if we're kind of intersecting with similar influences and similar ideas, and maybe it actually could be a great fit. End up having a great conversation with the person who would eventually lead the search committee. And that, took over a year. So, so basically they hire an interim pastor somewhere after that. So I'm sitting around like, oh, that church, that conversation, that was really cool. That's really unlikely. So I've got to just continue discerning and being open to other opportunities. And so we were, and those almost, but not quite panned out, a few of them. And then this job, the permanent position, posted. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I should just throw my resume into the ring here and see if I'm the last one standing. I don't know. Like I didn't assume anything at that point. And through a series of conversation and prayer and all that stuff, we really realized that this was God's best next step for us. And so we did something silly and we moved to another country, So it's been a hard transition insofar that it's been an administrative transition. So just getting across the border and all of the things you have to do that legally, work permit stuff. Our dog was, we have a 12-year-old dog who held us up for a little bit because she, for the last few years, has had an autoimmune disease that we knew about. And since she had that diagnosis, she can't get vaccinated again because it flares up her autoimmune disorder. And so to get her into Canada, we had to jump through all these legal hoops. It was just wild, like how many things we had to administrate. But all of the big things, right? Where we live, the families we get to know, the opportunities, like all of the big rock, hopeful things about transition have been beautiful and good. All the nitty gritty, that was just a headache for a while, but we're actually past most of it, at least for now. So we're excited to be here. Brentview is a great place. The first day I started work, we had new restrictions put in place because the fourth wave of COVID hit Calgary much later than it hit most of the United States. And so we've been in masks and we've been 1/3 capacity since basically day one of me being here. But people have been flexible and excited, and there's really just amazing things happening. So we love it. We love it.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm so glad that it's worked out as well as it has. And now, did you have any family in Canada or friends in Canada, or was this just?
Oh, Scott, man, we showed up sight unseen. So we took the job, and we couldn't travel because of the travel bans that were all in place. Right. So I think it was August, we had already been affirmed as the lead pastor family. And we said, well, we better travel there because we need to know that we like this place. But we had already accepted the job because we just really believed that that's what the Lord was leading us to. And so, yeah, we have no connections outside of like seminary friends or like, I know a lot of people that are connected to things like the Meeting House and Jesus Collective, but nothing that's, I have family here because I'm Mennonite, but I don't know who they are. But they definitely exist, but I've never met them. So, yeah.
Now that triggers a thought. How close are you to Bruxy?
I'm sorry?
How close are you to Bruxy KV?
So we were in the same denomination for all these years back. So since 2012, I've known him. And we talk once in a while and support
I'm
each
sorry,
other's
I mean
work.
just close in proximity, your churches. I don't know anything about Canada. I'm not sure where they're located.
Yeah. Oh, it's hilarious. Yeah, no.
I'm sorry.
I was like, Bruxy,
I wasn't clear.
No. Yeah, Bruxy's a buddy, but besides that, no, he feels very far away. So we're in the same country, but it's definitely a decent flight, because we're north of the Montana border, I think.
Oh, okay.
And Toronto, I mean, it's almost New York, right? So, so it's a bit of a trek.
I'm not familiar enough with the country to know where everything is, so I was just curious.
No, that's funny. Yeah, I wouldn't either, actually. I had to learn. I'm still learning. My kid knows more because she's in school, so.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. How different is Brentview than the church you were in Seattle? Is this a big change? Or, I mean, I would imagine if they hired you that you're somewhat similar in theology and obviously similar in style. But is there a big difference in culture, or is this going to be a big change for you, or is it pretty much the same? Or I'm not sure how it was in Seattle.
So Seattle was very much a missional church plant thing, right? So we're always very organic. We took there's been various versions of the church we planted as people moved and as things shifted. So no, we definitely were very kind of smaller, low-key, intimate community in Seattle. This is much more of your standard, Protestant, programmed church, right? So there's a youth ministry, kids ministry, all the stuff.
Sure.
And part of the discernment process was realizing that although we love the best parts of what our church planting experience was, that a lot of the things that I feel called to in my own personal like leadership formation and ministry are actually things that fit better in traditional church environments, I think. And not traditional by like, not music or whatever, but like
Sure.
there's some structure and there's some program, and I can guide and mentor a staff and these sorts of things. And so for me, it is a big change, but it's not a big change as though I've never been in these environments. I just took about a decade off from that kind of an environment, you know? So, yeah, it's definitely a change theologically. This particular church is definitely right where I am. I'm helping develop that more so, but there's not like absolute crazy uniformity, but there's room for me to be me as a pastor. And that is always something I truly desire. I want to be able to be who I am and not, all my stuff. And Scott, you know this, you have my book in your hand, and I've been writing for years. So like all the things I think that would rub people whatever kind of way are kind of out in the world. And so I don't, in my own personal situation, and I know this isn't how it is for everyone in ministry, I know, and I empathize with that. But for me, I have to be in a place where I don't have to have certain things that I have to hold back when it comes to, I'm a pacifist. I'm never going to hide that. It just happens to be a conviction of mine. You don't have to share that conviction. Totally cool.
That's got to bring,
got to
bring some freedom and some release to know that, hey, there's not, I kind of put all my cards on the table, read my book, read my writings, listen to my podcast. You're going to see who I am. So there's not a lot of surprises. This is who I am. Take me, leave me. There's got to be some freedom in that.
Beautiful freedom. And that's what we wanted. We've been in situations where we felt like we were playing defense. And we've also been in situations where we reacted to being in defense, and we've grown past a lot of that and now realize, I can have my convictions and I can shepherd people with different ones. And what does that look like to keep Jesus at the center of all of that, even where there are distinctions that are different? Yeah. So it's
what is something you said you were in Seattle for 10 years? Is that right? Planning?
So I was there for 8 years. But I finished up seminary and kind of was planning for about 2 years. So, yeah.
So what's a lesson you learned in that environment there in Seattle in the 8 years of planning? What is something you've taken with you to Brentview? How's Kurt different as a result of that?
Oh, a lot different. A lot different. Seattle was a place where I grew up a lot. If I'm really honest.
Sure.
There's a lot of transformation that happened there that took a lot of pain to get to that transformation. And so I'm a different human than I was when I was 30 and moving to Seattle, 29. And so there's that. I think God has just been forming me, and my marriage is radically stronger than it's ever been. Not perfect. We bicker. We've got all the stuff. Everyone does, but different, So there's that. But I would say when it comes to just ministry specifically, I think one of the things I realized, I kind of firmed up some of the things that I was questioning during my late 20s and early 30s. I'm open-handed on a lot of things still. I still believe that God, there's breathable space, there's mystery, but I also kind of know what my convictions are. And so I also realize now that how I teach changes, how I guide people changes when I'm in that space. And it's not to conform everyone else to my vision of convictions or whatever, but rather I think in Seattle for a season, I was worried about stepping on toes sometimes, like wounding people that had been wounded by the church. Like we had a lot of people who were on their way out of church, and our community became like their last stop. And I think what I've learned is I always want to love those people well. Many of them are my friends. I love them to death. But building a ministry around that takes a certain calling and a certain zeal for that. And I realized along the way that I also need partners who are kind of post-deconstruction. And not that I didn't have any, but just on the larger scale, people who have been through that journey of like wrestling with their faith and coming out the other side with more Jesus, more grace, more freedom. I need those people in my life, and I need to build ministry around them as well. And so I think that's the gift of a church like Brentview is we're going to make room for people wherever they are in their spiritual journey, but we're also already got people who are passionate. Like we've got like 4 prayer environments that meet every week, all led by volunteers. People are just passionate about Jesus in a different lane of life than was always possible. And some of that comes with numbers, and some of that comes with our ministry focus. And our ministry focus is
now. What
different.
is the culture? What size of community are you in Brentview, and what kind of culture is that?
Yeah, no, it's great. So Calgary, coming from the U.S., it's so hard to even understand things like moderate, liberal, conservative, right? But Calgary on the whole would be moderate, conservative, moderate, probably more moderate compared to U.S. spaces, but conservative-ish for Canada. And so Brentview kind of reflects that, I think, kind of a moderate tendency, politically, theologically, probably in that, at least in evangelical theology, probably a moderate tendency. The church is before COVID, and these are things I'm told because I've not seen it in action. Before COVID, probably about 500 to 600 people on a Sunday. I think right now, we just can't measure it. We've got maybe 130 people coming to our 1/3 capacity and video views, right? So, but a lot of engagement actually here, which is fascinating. And engagement from people who watch at home, who for them see it as their duty to give up their seat for someone else who might need it more than them. So it's not even a disengagement because they're like all in on the broadcast, but it's a sense of duty for the other. So there's really something unique about how this is played out here that's really beautiful. But yeah, that's some of the dynamics. So post COVID, whatever wave we're in, and hopefully we're done with some waves for a while. I don't know what it looks like, but yeah, we're heading somewhere, and it's going to be good.
Yeah, well, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that a little further into this because I got some questions regarding COVID and kind of where the church is right now, or at least some thoughts. Your family, before we get into your book, your family adjusted pretty well. Your 2 daughters, right?
Oh,
and
man.
Your wife, that's got to be a big change.
Huge, but it's a good change overall. Our family's all in California for the most part, so Seattle, Calgary, besides maybe the distance technically, it's all the same experientially, right? It takes a flight to get here. So the positives I would say is my wife Lauren is able to slow down a little bit. She's not working for the first time in over a decade and is home with her almost 3-year-old right now. And our oldest kiddo has found a network of friends already. So it's been a social gift in the sense that we've just stepped into community and people have loved us well. And that's not true of people for the most part who move to new cities. But because I'm a pastor and people all know who we are, we get a lot of invites, and we're grateful for that. And it's been a much easier transition than others might have. So, we'll keep leaning in.
Man, I tell you what, I wish you the best, and can't wait to see what all is going to happen there in Brentview. So
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. Hey, I want to jump into your book, and for those of you who are seeing this for the first time and you're not familiar with Kurt, this is his book. It's called Echoing Hope: How the Humanity of Jesus Redeems Our Pain. So I want to jump into this, and I just want to, some things that stuck out to me, Kurt, some things that I'd like to just, kind of open your mind a little bit more and get some additional thoughts on it. We certainly we won't even attempt to cover a third of the book, but
for sure.
Just a few things that stuck out to me. My first question is why this book? I mean, you no doubt wrote this, I would imagine, in your mid-30s. Is that right?
Oh yeah.
And so you're in Seattle at this time. You're planning this church.
Yeah.
You're in your mid-30s. You've got 2 small kids, and you're writing on pain.
Yeah.
So I have to go. Why? Why this book? Is it a result of the people you saw there? Maybe some things in your own life. You just felt this was a need within the body.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to dive into the pain?
What a lovely question. It's true. It's true. A lot of people wonder, like, you're writing your first book and you're talking about suffering. Like, what's so, like, doesn't sound very fun,
Yeah.
and yet it was all kinds of emotions. But so I had a very hard childhood, and I had to process that in all kinds of different ways over the years, and I, as a teenager, had a lot of healing as I gave Jesus my full attention, that kind of recommitment as a teenager. And for years, that carried me so far. For years, knowing that Jesus was there in my past, but had a better future for me, that motivated me so much to say the past doesn't define me. That was one model for understanding a broken childhood, physical abuse, scarcity, all of those things. And as I got into Seattle, we're planting a church. We're trying to figure out what does life look like now? Are we going to plant the next cool big thing? What's this all about? I start really struggling with anxiety at a deeper level than I had. And anxiety's always been there, low grade. Probably some undiagnosed PTSD or something creeps in once in a while, and other things. And I had it so bad, though, that it was debilitating. I just didn't want to do anything. Like when I was at home, I had a child that I could be hanging out with, and I didn't. I just was frozen. I tell the story in the book that I just felt frozen on the couch. I couldn't engage. And something in me just triggered, I need to explore why this is. This is not good. This is not God's will for my life. And so through a couple of good friends, I decided to step into therapy, found a guy who loves the Lord, but is also thoroughly good at psychology. And that journey plus spiritual direction and spiritual formation, all these things are coming together at the same time. And as I'm wrestling with my own pain, an interest is emerging that at the time I actually didn't know was connected. And that was the humanity of Jesus. I just was really fascinated with the idea that you and I are created to become like the perfect human who is Jesus, the image bearer that we're always always meant to be back in Genesis 1 and 2. And so I start writing a book about that. And I even take it to, I have an agent. So I get in the room with a major publisher, and they're like, we love what you write and we love what we read when we get into the book. But you have to think about hook here. Like, we're not sure what you're like. People aren't asking, how does the humanity of Jesus change my life? Like, maybe some people are, but not like instantly. And I was like, oh, so I'm finally almost going to get a book deal, but I'm not. That's great. That's how I received that.
Yeah.
But then I also was like, I've got to be mature here. I've got to process this. I've got to. So I just let that linger. My agent actually was like, let it linger and think about it and wrestle with it and get creative, and also realize that because people like the content and like your writing style, you're already almost there. But it's, how do you get people into the door? It's kind of like ministry. How do you get people into the door? And so I sat with that, and I didn't want it to feel gimmicky. I didn't want it to be like, oh, here's something that'll make people feel good about the humanity of Jesus. Like, that's not my style. Like, I don't want to. I try to be authentic where I'm aware of my need to be, of course. And so I was sitting. I feel like I might have been. A lot of my good thoughts come in the shower. I don't know why, but it just does. Or in the car. And I realized the thing that connects Jesus' humanity to my life personally is pain. That Jesus chose to endure suffering, and that somehow shows me how to be more human in a broken world. And so I started saying, okay, am I willing to share my story? Like, am I in a place where I'm willing to go all in on this? Because it's going to mean personally being vulnerable in a different kind of way, and putting out there in public beyond just maybe a sermon recording from here or there in some feed that no one ever listened to, like, this is a public record, and then I had this sense of peace that I was supposed to do it. And I started writing a book that was basically, if I were to summarize this to friends and family, I basically say, this is what Jesus did in my life through Seattle. This is how Jesus shaped me in Seattle. That's basically what this book is. And I didn't know I was going to be writing that book, but I'm so grateful I did, because look, even if it sells 5 copies, I think it did a little better than that. But even if it sells just a few copies, I probably bought 5 copies. So, that's
so you're pushing at least 10.
Yeah, man. Yeah, exactly. But like, even if it doesn't sell well, this is a testimony of what God did in my journey. And it's something that when my kids are curious about their dad, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, hopefully I can hand it to them and say, this is what your dad was sitting with, wrestling with when you were a little precious child. And you were such a gift because you helped shape me along with Jesus. Like, I wanted to offer that. And, and that gives me joy.
You did a great job. Yeah, you did a great job. It's easy to read. It's interesting. It's got great stories, throughout, some personal, events in your life. If it's okay, I got a couple questions about the writing process, because something you said there triggered something in me. When you began to write this, did the book evolve as you were writing it, or did you kind of know where you were headed, or did you get into it and then there was some maybe emotional surprises there, digging up some of your own stories, got a little bit more difficult than maybe you thought, or, I don't know. I'm just curious, did that kind of grow as you began to write and you went in different places, or did you pretty much have this book mapped out as you began?
So I had a version of this book mapped out for sure. So,
okay.
So for instance, when you write a book, and you want to get it published, most people will do like 2 or 3 chapters and an outline, and here's why I'm sellable, all of that silly stuff. Right. And so I had a direction for sure. I think the original title was going to be something like "He is not here," which was about that line from the Gospels where they find the empty tomb and he is not here. And really that image ended up staying in the book. But I hated the title. Like, I liked the concept of the title, but it's like, it doesn't grab me. And so, we ended up with this, which I really love how it all turned out.
Yeah.
But
I love the title.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That's good.
And the book evolved in a couple of ways. So the first draft I submitted, like 3 weeks after the pandemic started. And so here I am just in my bunker finishing up this manuscript, and I'm a resourcer at heart. You kind of know this probably about me. So I'm putting like crazy amounts of footnotes, like so many footnotes. And I had a word count limit that I was supposed to keep to, which is like 60,000 words or something, which is like the average popular Christian book probably.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that footnotes counted against my total word count. And so here I am, I'm writing this thing, and I'm like, man, this is like, it's going to feel easy to read, but for all those nerdy people, they're going to be able to track down all my sources. Like, I'm going to point them to Josephus, and I'm going to point them towards, like, I'm just all in on the journey, right? Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I got that to my editor, and he goes, yeah, all of that counts against your total, and you're already over your total. Bro, we've got to cut this a little. And and it was good. And so it wasn't just needing to shorten it, but also one of the things that was so helpful was my editor is also an author and an amazing just writer. His name's Paul Pastor. And he was a helpful guide for onboarding me into the creative journey for this first book too. He would help me see things like, hey, Pastoral Kurt or Professor Kurt, where are you in this paragraph? Like, help me navigate this, because as a reader, we want more pastoral, undergirded by professor, but not explicitly so. And so I had to do that dance. But I'll tell you, by the end of it, the final product, I get a lot of joy out of it. Even like, and it's not a arrogance thing. It's like wow, I partnered with God and some friends, and this book is a product. And I just am overwhelmingly blessed because of that. And so yeah, it certainly evolved, and the way it evolved all led to it becoming better for sure. Yeah.
Well, I know in reading the book, there were some painful events that you describe. and,
Mm-hmm.
different things that you went through in your journey. And I'm just always curious when an author writes those things, if it really stirs up, the emotion within
Yes.
them, and is it difficult to go through? And then, you get into the vulnerability part
Yeah.
of it, which I have a question on that,
Yeah.
just regarding, how vulnerable do you get? When does it get too much? Am I divulging some things here I maybe shouldn't? Is a little too much for a pastor? And
Yeah.
kind of where's that line? And some of your own wounds that may not be completely healed
Mm-hmm.
yet, and
Mm-hmm.
you're still kind of nursing a few of them, and you're
Yeah.
kind of further down the road in some of them. And I'm just I just find that
Oh,
fascinating. And
yeah.
we stand in front of a lot of people, week after week, and we share some of the very, vulnerable parts of who we are, and it can get
Yeah.
difficult at times. At least it has with me.
Mm-hmm.
I have felt sometimes I go home and I think, why did I share that story? That was so private.
Yeah.
It was so personal. But yet
Yeah.
those are often the very messages that people come up and say, man, that meant so much to me.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so vulnerable. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
just curious how
Yeah.
that was for you walking through some of that.
It
So
was a work of discernment for sure.
yeah.
I have a strong conviction that being vulnerable is a gift from God to others and
Mm-hmm.
to yourself. But I also have a strong conviction that oversharing is unhelpful. And so I had some
Now, how do you draw
parameters.
that line? How do you do
Yes.
that?
Well, you have to have. Yeah, I had to have parameters. So I
Yeah.
knew first. One line was, I'm sharing my own stories, not the stories of other people involved in them. So my mom shows up in the book a few times because she was there during a lot of the abuse. But my aim was, I'm not sharing her story, I'm sharing mine. And I got holy permission from my mom before I put this into print. And I wasn't going to say anything that dishonored her, that shamed her. I wanted to elevate her in spite of the fact that, as she would admit, her decision making was not great when I was a kid. She wasn't abusive physically to me, for sure, but she created conditions where that was going to happen by having this relationship with this man. And, it's all in the book. But so one of the parameters though was, is this my story or am I sharing someone else's business? And I can't share other people's business. So for instance, I don't have the names of my siblings aren't in the book. I generalize. And then there's some deep pain that I have shared publicly once or twice in my younger years that I now will not share publicly again. And that was part of the work of discernment. And so it's not in the book because I realized that it was blurring the line between my story and my mom's story. And and this wasn't at her request. This was just me doing this work and deciding, I get to hold back here. I'm not actually going to go there. That's not for other people. And the same thing with my wife. What parts of this are honoring her part of the story and which, so there's a navigation there. And ultimately, I don't want to share things that, look, I'm never going to heal completely from my brokenness. But if there's fresh brokenness, it's not going to help other people because it has to come through a grid of grace and a grid of God's been at work for a journey here before I feel comfortable really bringing it to the table. And so I asked hard questions. A lot of the time I had multiple people in my life that I was like, am I doing this well? And am I honoring the other people involved? And if I'm not, please call me out because this is about to go into the world. And, I honestly,
well, again, I think you did well. I remember reading parts of it and it was focused on you, and you didn't divulge too much. And that's, something I've had my own share of pain and
it's hard.
My own childhood. And I try to share some of those stories up front. Then sometimes I walk away and I think, maybe I made, that person seem a little worse than maybe they are, or, and I've had to battle that, over 30 years of ministry and try to find that happy balance there, if I can.
Yes.
So anyway, I'm just curious, another person who's sharing those family stories and some of the pain of childhood and stepfather and, and all that kind of stuff. And, you don't want to embarrass them, but you want to be honest. And
right.
I was just curious. So
no, I appreciate that. And honestly, for me, that was one of the best parts of this process for me was really like thinking through, what are my parameters for actually being vulnerable, and
Yeah.
how do I communicate that in a grace-filled way? And so I appreciate
Yeah.
your affirmation in that.
Oh yeah.
And I'll
Yeah.
tell you, it's not
It's well
easy.
done. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not.
Yeah.
One thing you said in your book is that Jesus, and this may not be exactly how you said it, but Jesus is often hidden within shame. And we're talking about shame and vulnerability and just kind of that. How so? How is he often hidden within the shame that we carry? He's there, but we don't see him.
Yeah.
You know, we look for him, but we can't find him. And I know a lot of the people sitting in my church, I'm sure in your own, carry a ton of shame with them from their childhood, from their first marriage, from, you know, decisions they've made, addictions they have, whatever. So talk to me a little bit, Kurt, just how does he hide within it?
Yeah, you know, that's really, really a great question. And one of the things that I personally have a strong conviction that God doesn't directly cause our pain, but that God is very good at recycling pain and bringing something good out of it, and whenever possible. And that's a general statement, so it needs nuance in various ways. Like there's times when Jesus in the gospel, you know, in the New Testament will say, "Hey, disciples, go do this thing, and it's going to make you suffer." But again, that suffering is for the cause of Christ, and it's a kind of suffering that is redemptive in its own way, right? But the like big picture, like big scale, does God want a human to suffer? Well, no, but the conditions are here for suffering. And so how do we navigate that with Jesus? And so one of the things that I think is really significant is that it's often in retrospect that we go back into those memories, back into those heart spaces, and recognize the ways in which Jesus was present, even if in the moment we may not know it, in the moment we may not experience it. And that's not to simply just like wash away the fact that the experience itself was hard, but it's simply to say that sometimes God is with us and God hates that we're suffering. And in spite of that, because of free will in the world, it's going to play out. And so God is already on the move to say, how can I redeem suffering here? How can I bring something good, even though this is wrong? This is evil. And so people have to wrestle with that.
So it's actually going back and finding or looking for God in those very painful moments that you experienced even in your past?
I think so. And I don't think it's exclusively that.
Right.
That's been a big part of my journey. I mean, I think there's moments where we experience the goodness of Jesus in the middle of suffering, but the suffering doesn't go away. And that's a gift in and of itself. There's other times where we've experienced deep wounds, deep trauma, felt like we weren't experiencing Jesus maybe in the moment for whatever reason. I mean, some trauma is so big that you have to ask, is there even a God here, right?
Yep.
But then we come out the other side and we recognize what would God's experience have been like? Jesus, can you reveal that to me? And I know that gets a little mystical, a little, prayerful, but in my own experience, I would say that God has something to show us, that there's something of God's heart of suffering with us, that God actually feels pain and is feeling our pain in the moment. And that to me is redemptive.
So that is a little of what you talk about when you mention about page 30. I just wrote this down, where you say that we miss half of Jesus' significance when we miss his humanity.
Yep.
So it's in the humanity where the suffering is.
Yeah.
And we often, what would you say that a lot of the, I don't know if it's a lot, but just there's a decent amount of people sitting in church weekend after weekend who really have never connected with the humanity of Jesus.
Yeah.
They connect with the divinity. They connect with the fact he's the Son of God, he's in glory, he's resurrected, he's powerful, all these different things. But we really, other than the cross, other than looking at the cross on Easter, Good Friday, those things, we just miss the significance of the human side of Christ. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I mean, look at Jesus on the cross, right? That is the ultimate moment of shame. The Bible says in all kinds of different ways, like Jesus basically naked on a cross, dying for his enemies. is the most shameful experience a human in the first century could have. And it's yet in that moment that we see the heart and character of God revealed through the humanity of Jesus suffering in that moment. And so I think a lot of the time we disconnect ourselves from the humanity of Jesus because we need a God who transcends suffering. We need a God who can fix it. And what we see in Jesus is a God who doesn't always choose to fix it, but chooses to endure it in solidarity with us. And I think there's such a big spiritual payoff to starting to say the humanity of Jesus isn't just so that he could live for 33 years, die, and conquer sin and death, and then resurrect. But we look at his life and we see his suffering and we say, oh, there is a God who gets it. And it looks like human flesh when God gets it. God is so good that God takes on human flesh and will not settle for being just the transcendent being out there. That God might feel like a fix-it genie and someone we can rely on, but we need a God also who empathizes with our experience. And as soon as we step into that space with God, all of a sudden we start to realize, wow, my pain is awful. So is Jesus's pain. And yet God is on the move to restore all things, including my brokenness and my life. And that to me is such a deeply missed connection point experientially in the spiritual journey.
Yeah, that's so good. And I would imagine that this message is really underneath so much of your preaching and teaching, and it just blends into many of your messages. Do you say that's kind of an overall theme? Or?
Oh yeah. I mean, and the idea that when we look at Jesus and we want to become more like him, that helps us become more human, not less, because ultimately being human is what God designed us to be. And being broken and sinful, of course, as we are, that's just us being less human. So it's not as though God wants us to escape our humanity. He wants us to step all the way into it. And when we finally do that, it'll take a resurrection to pull off. But post-resurrection of humankind who are in Christ, oh, wow, we're going to be fully, finally human forever. And so I think some people get thrown off by that language because they're not familiar. They're like, oh, that sounds really new agey. No.
Yeah,
this is Orthodox Christianity 101. And we're invited to take the human nature of our own lives and the human nature of Jesus very seriously.
Yeah, that theology is so old it sounds new.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think when most people think about, I want to be more like Jesus, God, make me more like Jesus, they're certainly thinking of the divinity side. They're thinking the victory. They're thinking overcoming. They're thinking, being able to, embarrass the Pharisees and the teachers of the law with the knowledge and wisdom. Rarely are they thinking about washing more feet. Rarely are they thinking about, taking the stripes. The pain, the hurt, the disappointment, the people rejecting, walking away, disciples leaving, someone close to them betraying them, on and on it goes. Those are not the things that we often think about when we say, make me more like Jesus. And I think I feel it's a message that our world needs more today probably than ever. I think that's maybe why resonated so much with your book, because it's just such an incredibly important message, especially right now when our whole world seems to be suffering.
Yeah. And asking the question, what does it mean to be human like Jesus? Well, it means that we become more of the image bearer God wanted. And that image bearer seems to be someone who cares about a relationship with God, relationship with the soil, relationship with humanity, right? And so, and it doesn't just make us more image bearers. I don't have a good word for that, image bearingness, whatever you want to call it. Like it doesn't just do that in that sense, but Jesus has compassionate humanity. You see it throughout the gospel. So it's not just about us being built up in Christ so that we feel like we're more whole and healthy. It's actually about pouring ourselves out into a world of brokenness and saying, my ongoing growth towards becoming more human like Jesus gives me this compassionate humanity to step into a world of pain, COVID, etc., to say, how can I love like Jesus loves and endure what like Jesus endures for the sake of the other.
That's so good. Well, hey, let me ask you this. What would you say, to the hurting person now who may be listening and, as a pastor, no doubt. Every Sunday morning, I'll just mention this. Every Sunday morning, we have a little huddle. We get our volunteers together, and we just sit in the auditorium, and sometimes we gather in a circle, and it's just those who are serving that day. And we always take time to just say, hey, what prayer needs do you have? What do you have going on? And I'm just, every Sunday morning, it seems like I'm just shocked at the amount of pain that is in the lives of just our volunteers. And they just represent they're just a fraction of the people here. And people are hurting everywhere. I mean, we got people diagnosed with cancer. We've got people's marriages falling apart. We've had so many people affected by deaths because of COVID in our community, in our city, and on and on. So let's imagine that I don't think we have to imagine, it's true. There are people listening right now, this podcast when it's released, and they're going to be driving down the road. They're going to be, sitting in their living room or whatever, jogging, and they're listening, and we're talking about pain and Jesus and his humanity and overcoming it and becoming more like Christ. And yet their heart is breaking and they feel betrayed. They feel they've prayed, they've fasted, they've given, they've done everything, and they just don't get it. And it's, so what do you say to that, Kurt? What hope, the echoing of hope, what hope do you have for that mom who maybe just lost her baby, or that family whose marriage they thought was going to work out, and they've gone through counseling and it still ended up divorced? And I know you don't have all the answers. I don't either. We're both pastors doing the best we can. But what's a word of encouragement and some hope you have for them now?
I think I probably answer this question differently every time I'm asked. So what comes to mind right now is that there's wisdom in those situations in resisting the impulse to make meaning out of everything that's happening right now. In other words, it would be easy to say things like, we lost my baby because God wanted the baby more than we did.
Yeah.
No. That's a narrative that if you play it out too long can lead to places that aren't healthy. Yeah. Don't overassign that. What if it's the opposite? What if it's when you lost that baby, God felt the loss with you? And just sit in that for a while and ask the questions about what does that mean for God to just sit with me in my pain? We're very quick as people to try to jump over pain. And I think one of the things that I'm learning, and I still have to learn this, pain, for anyone who's an Enneagram person, I'm an Enneagram 7. Pain is the thing I resist. So I wrote a book about pain because I resist it so much. And I would just simply say that with the right boundaries in place, other people in your life, etc., sitting in pain is wise. And assigning meaning to all your pain and attaching God's name to it will not bring hope and healing like you think it will. It's actually can be, and I don't want to overstate this, but it can be just simply a spiritual coping mechanism that helps you avoid the weight and reality of what's actually happened. Now, I'm not against finding those things that help you cope, although I kind of talk about that in the book a little bit in a radical way, I think. But what I want to say is don't skip over the hard part.
Yeah.
As long as you have boundaries that don't let you spiral out of control and move towards harm, you don't want to be in a place where you're moving towards harm of yourself or others. Yeah. But if you have enough capacity with the resources you have to let the pain linger a little bit and ask questions of it and to be honest with God about it, that's going to pay off so much. It's not going to bring back the baby. It's not going to fix the marriage. It's not going to do all those things, but there is hope. There is healing on the other side of it. Because there was hope and healing for Jesus on the other side of his pain, on the other side of his struggles. And I think Scripture points us to the reality that anyone who's in Christ on the other side of pain is resurrection someday, is a new creation. And that isn't some utopia thing that we just delegate to some future event, but it's something that can inform how we find hope in the present. And so That's what comes to mind. Yeah.
That that really brings up something, and I'll just thought of this, and love your thoughts on it. It seems like we, especially in the Western culture, do everything we can to get out of pain as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's a small headache, we take ibuprofen or whatever. As soon as we feel any kind of discomfort, we try our best to numb ourselves or to get ourselves in a different position. And pain never has, and I don't want to say that that it's a medicine in and of itself, but there is something about pain that does seem to bring a cleansing, a renewal, a reprioritizing, I guess you could say. And we try to dodge it so quickly. We never seem to let it have its work, almost like James says, count it joy when you face these trials, and you know that this testing will eventually, but you got to have, the work's got to continue. And I think what you just said there about sitting in your pain, I think that is so key. Rather than immediately trying to get out of it, what are the lessons here to be learned? And it's not that God gave it to you to teach you a lesson, but there are lessons to be learned. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, and I think that's that sort of recycling image, right? So there's trash that happens in our lives. God doesn't cause the trash directly, doesn't want the trash. There's powers and principalities and free will floating all over the place that create conditions where suffering is real. And what do we do with that? Well, we sit with it and see what God recycles from it. See what God can rummage from it. And sometimes, I'll be really honest, there's some things that maybe there's very little or nothing left. Some things just get burned up. Some things are so bad that it's just burned up. But to have the capacity to ask the question, could God be doing something redemptive even in the midst of the pain? Is much different than saying God caused the pain to do something redemptive. God, I feel like that just diminishes God's glory in some ways. Like does God really need terrible things to happen to teach us things? I don't think so. I think God's creative.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's either preached or it's implied. And it really bothers me. Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to admit that for a number of years in my early years of ministry, I believe that.
Oh, sure, I did
every
too.
Single thing that happened, God caused it. He wanted it to happen, or he could have stopped it, but he chose not to because there was a lesson here. There was something I needed to learn. Something in me needed to be burned out.
Right.
Something in me was prideful. Something in me was sinful. And the older I've grown, hopefully wiser. The more I've read and tried to expand my heart and mind a little. And hanging around people much smarter than me, I realize that, that isn't, and that's very dangerous. I really think that's a dangerous way of looking at God and faith and Scripture.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people, Kurt, who still hold on to that, and they'll say it to me even in counseling or in talking with them in the hallway or lobby. Well, God could have stopped it, so obviously He has something, for me in this, and I just have to trust that. My son is gone or my husband died, but I just have to trust that God wanted him more than I did, or something like that. And it really pains me almost to hear that anymore.
Well, yeah, and I hear it a lot too. Yeah. And this last Sunday, I taught from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and we didn't really emphasize this point, but the point always sticks out to me when I study the text. At the end, Jesus is going to conquer death. Like death, it says death is the last enemy. And so many people who are dealing with grieving a death attribute that to God. And yet God says, no, death is actually an enemy to God. So why would God partner with death? Now are there moments that are outside of the norm in the Bible? And we have to be honest about those. Sure. Things like Ananias and Sapphira. Sure. We need to have good conversations around hard passages. But on the paradigm level, on the normative level, you don't see God, especially as revealed in Jesus, looking to cause circumstances to elevate God's status somehow. Yeah. God doesn't need that. God mourns that. And so I'm right there with you, Scott. And it's a pastoral reality that does cause disruption because so many of us were trained to think differently about God's nature. And it's hard to navigate even as a teaching pastor, who may have that conviction.
Yep.
And so, and to honor people where they're at too, on the other end,
Yep.
right? Like,
I read somewhere, I don't even remember who it was, and maybe you do, but I read that, when you look in the casket and you see the little baby, you're not looking at the face of God. You're looking at the face of God's enemy. And I remember that grabbed me, and I thought, that's what I need to realize. Death is the enemy of God. He
yeah,
conquered death, just like you said. So when you
yeah,
look at that loved one in that casket and you think, that is not the hand of God there. That's the hand of the enemy, and you have
yeah,
to keep remembering that there is hope, and the echoing of hope beyond the grave.
that's right.
And that we who believe in the resurrection and life, we believe that even beyond death there is hope, and death
Right.
is not the answer. Death is the problem.
That's right.
And he's conquered that. So anyway, Kurt, let me wrap this time up with you by asking
Oh,
you one other question, and
sure.
unrelated to what we're talking about now, but this goes back to the pandemic and the restrictions and kind of the deconstruction movement and all these kind of things that have happened over the last couple of years. What are your thoughts? And I know this is a huge question,
No,
so
it's
I'm
fine.
not asking
It's
you
fine.
for a full answer, but just a few thoughts on how we're changing as a church. Because I don't know. Maybe I'm a little cynical, but I just don't think we'll ever go back to the way things were, which I think is actually good in
Right.
many ways, to what things were prior to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I know in our own church, I could talk a long time just about some things that have changed that I think are good. They're still painful, but they're good, and we needed to
Yeah.
have some change, and I think the church at large needed to have some change. But what do you see as kind of how the church kind of will end up, if you will? So I'm asking you to predict a little
Yeah.
bit, but
Yeah.
where are we on the other side of the pandemic? What do you think?
So I think pragmatically speaking, I think it's pretty clear that churches that have been willing to uh, think through, like, what do we actually do? Like, why do we really exist? Are we here to maintain this smorgasbord of programs, or are we here to proclaim and embody the good news of Jesus? And what does that mean? And how does that affect every part of how we organize our ministries? And maybe there's some ministries that no longer serve that purpose in a very clear, direct way. So we're having to retool. We're having to really say, what are the few things that we should do well, rather than spread ourselves over all these things and do them partially okay.
Yeah,
And
that's good.
so I think churches that really hone into what is the human need in my city, what is the human need in our world, and how does that intersect with the gospel, and how do we organize around that? I think we're moving towards some really hopeful times for those who are willing to do the hard things there. And when it comes to my cynicism, I worry that, so it's not just that we have become polarized, it's the suspicion of everything that concerns me. That there's no longer a spirit of trust in a lot of spaces during this COVID stuff. There's no longer, there's just a lot of rabbit holes that people have dived into and baptized it as Christian. Just like in the States, especially, we often baptize nationalism or any of these other things, right? And so I worry that we're baptizing suspicion and anti-science and different things. And I'm saying I'm saying people that I love have dove in these directions. And as they do so, there's just an increasing split of a different kind that's just really heartbreaking, I think. And so while on the one hand I want to say, let's bear with each other, unity matters, I affirm that. I also want to say that telling the truth matters and standing up for what's right matters. And so we have to figure out, how do we do both of those well? And sometimes it is going to mean that there's some parting of the ways, and sometimes it'll mean, no, we're going to bear together even where we disagree on some of this stuff. So I think when it comes to Christian community, those are some of the things I'm noticing, and pragmatically was kind of what I shared a bit ago.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, Kurt, thank you so very much for being with me today. This has been a real honor to have you here. And let me just remind everyone again, go pick up Echoing Hope. I'm sure you can get it at different bookstores, online. They're available everywhere. And read it, buy an extra copy for a friend. Be a great small group study. It would be a great book study to kind of get with some friends together and say, hey, let's read a chapter or two and talk about it. You've got questions at the end of your chapter, some additional thoughts that I think are really good to help people. And it's good stuff. So thank you, Kurt. It's a real honor.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll just say, I'll put a plug out there. We've recorded 6 or 7 short videos based on the major themes of the book. They're still being produced right now, but those are going to come out packaged as small group curriculum for churches that want to do it.
Oh, good.
And paired with sermon series resources for pastors who want to go all in on this humanity of Jesus stuff.
That reminds me, there are a few things here in the book I underlined that I'm going to be putting in my sermons.
Hey,
so I'll give you credit.
I appreciate the credit. But
it's really good. Really good. Hey, that reminds me, do you have another book kind of on your horizon? Is that something you want to write? It doesn't even have to be within the next year or so, but just something that might be brewing inside of you right now?
I want to be really blunt and honest. After this book was done, I started trying to outline new books. And they all fell flat in my experience. And so I'm actually giving myself grace and permission to just see what emerges. And so I do want to write. I love writing. Writing is like my creative space. So yes, I do want to do more. The question is, what's Jesus going to show me that I should do? And I haven't figured that out yet. So we'll see.
Just be patient, and he'll stir that up in you when it's time.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it.
That's great. Well, thank you again, Kurt.
Hey, thank you. This is so great.